Good yourself. Busy? Counting the days. Yeah.
Should I write a message on the back of my shirt?
Sure. Stop. No, you know what I want to say. You can turn for some profiles, Rich. Turn for some profiles.
Yeah, it's when you enjoy it. You're terribly boring. That's what I think when I get there. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, yeah, right. None of us know. Yeah. None of us know. You know, when it's making yeah.
It's a good thing.
It's a nice cinematic pan.
It is what it is, ever. Depends on where I sit. Watch, I do the audience too. It swivels.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome all to our workshop, last one of the year. We're waiting for Ryan McGuire. We're trying to take care of a couple little things. John won't be here. John Brown won't be here. He's busy. Cleaning up. Number 8 on our list, review of the draft 2020 planning board meeting minutes. We'll need to adopt them Monday evening. Anybody? I know that the dates we're looking at, we did want to change to say that the meetings will take place on this floor that are regular meetings rather than signify a specific room.
The prior notice at a conference room, we were kind of involved in holding workshops here, so we just say second floor. People will find.
Yeah, they'll find us.
Working into those.
No, these were for, where we have our meetings. This is our meeting dates for next year.
Oh, and Sue just reminded me, the first workshop in January is New Year's Day, Wednesday, so I doubt we may do that. What day would the board want to hold the
I think we have it the 8th, the next Wednesday. Does that work? Everybody know?
Say workshops are the first Wednesday of every month except January 1st, January.
Yeah. Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. Memorial Day, religious holiday end of September, Columbus Day. I think only one, September 29th.
That's young.
So that would be the 28th.
Yeah, yeah. No.
Yeah, we had a couple of them, yeah. All right, anybody here from Engineering Properties? We did get revised plans on McDonald on Beamer Road, two-lot subdivision. We received them just before the holiday, a week before the holiday. Unless you want to do that, thank you. Anybody have anything to say on McDonald?
They still need to figure out what to do with the driveway.
Right.
So,
Do you think they'll need a variance?
I think that they could modify their plan. And it's a question of whether they want to decide to go for a variance or whether they choose to modify the plan.
Is that option?
We just got the review, so we'll send it to them. We can send over the McDonald review.
Yeah, I think what we just got was exactly.
We were looking, we looked at what Leslie was saying, does it mean Ashton? We looked at it the other day, and it was like 330 feet or something, that Ashton with 30 miles an hour needed. So it's deficient, in that respect.
Right. So let them address it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to everyone?
Other than that,
They're
it's
trying
much.
to follow the soil cut from the old mining. But really, they're taking a driveway like on a slope, the land is like that, and they're trying to cut into the slope when they go east to west, instead of like coming, moving that lot line over to the east where it projects into lot one.
They could put
Go
an angle
straight
point.
down the hill,
Yeah.
and it's only 10 feet down the hill from up top. Yeah, really.
Yeah, let them address, I think we have them address, comments, but that, the important one. They do fly around that corner now, but tough.
It's,
There's a lot of traffic on Beamer Road.
yeah, and it's more than cutting down the one big tree right on the corner. It's clearing all the big trees that are between the road and the ravine right there.
That could have been shaped differently, that lot. I wish that our zoning was clear where the block had to be to make it a conforming lot.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I pointed out in my comments. I didn't think that they were going to address the issue about the back lot the way they did. It appears to be code, so we can't we can't insist that it be otherwise, but that was not what I expected.
A certain square has to fit, and it fits into wetland. It doesn't fit into the top.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not clarified in the code. That's one thing
I mean, so they moved the garage, so they solved that problem, but
Right.
I still think they can move the buildings further to the north.
they moved it a little bit, but
10 feet.
yeah.
Yeah, really,
Yeah.
it's not enough. When you
Yeah.
stand in there, you got these tall trees with no undergrowth on the property at all, more or less.
Right.
It's kind of mature forest, is in the, not there anymore.
I think the more you move it forward, I think it pinches it to the setback lines. It kind of
Yeah.
narrows down there.
Yep,
And
they-
there,
they
we're back to
cleared
the,
it.
Well, again, it's where they put the lot line.
right. Yeah, it's the, so, but let them address our comments as far as the driveway, whether they're gonna do a variance or redesign the drive.
Also, let's
I owe you, I have it.
Okay.
I'll give it to
I'll
you
wait
today.
till you get both.
Yeah, get both and send them over.
Okay.
Okay.
Show just like this.
Okay, all right, we'll work down our list now. For Bracken Road Properties LLC, Bracken 20 Warehouses, we're looking to reconvene the hearing, this coming Monday, 7:30. Dave, do you have any updates on the project?
Well, just to let you know, Rich sent over a list of property owners that there might have been some problems with the
Right.
initial certified,
Right.
so we sent those out last Wednesday. I don't have the green card with me, but I'll have them on Monday.
And the white also
Yeah.
seat.
Right.
You might not get a green card
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, yeah.
back. Any green cards you get, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, Jane. The McDonald project on Beamer Road, we'll get you comments from both our engineer and planning, if not today, tomorrow.
Okay.
All right, the issue with the site distance on the driveway, that was our major concern at this point.
Okay.
All right, so we'll get them over to you.
The other thing on here is for the Galaxy North.
Okay, all right.
Is the fire department contact
No.
you? Okay, because I know the chief wants your information,
Okay,
because I want you to send them your information.
okay,
Okay?
I appreciate it.
Anything else on Bracken 20 as we're set to resume the hearing on Monday? Okay, I guess then the Galaxy Limited, Galaxy Montgomery North, Bracken Road and Barron Road, SCU permit site plan revised plans received the 18th of this month. Question on the EAF Part 3. Jay had been going back and forth with some emails. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, so, basically, we've given you, a traffic report, we're getting the wetlands have been delineated, which is with the perk. And so we just wanna know if there's any other seeker-related reports that you need at this point, to, you know, give yourself comfortable, feel comfortable making the seeker determination. We also, it's been 30 days since we circulated, so we're hoping to get a seeker determination for the next meeting, so we can keep this project moving forward.
I did some comments on that. There's still some things that I think you still have in the works. Sightline across to Barron Road, because we need to be sure that all of those, truck docks are screened from Barron Road.
Right, we still are gonna do official impact analysis.
And the question of noise is still open. I did comments on that.
I just got them
Yeah,
yesterday.
Yeah, I know, that they went up pretty late, but, my concern with that, with the traffic is I'm not happy with the way some things were worded with that. We kinda had some of the same problem that we did with 915-17K, which
Yeah.
is that, it's, the planning board will require, which is like, they should be a mitigation measure that they are offering and not something that like we're requiring, because
Mitigation measure for the added traffic
for the
generated by
added
the
traffic,
project.
right,
Right.
because
Well, I think
this is
they-
something where, under build conditions, there's a significant worsening of an already deficient.
Well, not
um,
necessarily from this project, I mean, it's
I
all the
understand that,
projects
I understand
cumulatively.
that,
So I
but
think
it's
the
still,
mitigation was they
Yeah,
were
well-
gonna contribute to the fund.
yeah, well, but it was the way it was worded, and I have a problem with 9:15,
It's a
17,
language.
with that. It's a language issue.
Yeah,
It's a question
it's
of
not
like,
the intent
the
of
board's
everything.
requiring instead
Right.
of we're offering.
Yeah, I mean, we understand you have to review it, we just wanna know what direction we're taking with Seeger. Are you okay with just these individual reports, or are you gonna be looking for a part 3, formal document? 'Cause,
I
like,
think without the open reports that you've acknowledged need to be submitted, I think it's too soon to say.
So we're waiting on those couple of reports,
Yes.
visual and noise.
Yeah, and we don't, we don't have grading, we don't have, we don't really have plans to go forth, so I think it's too soon to say.
So we need the plans more developed then.
well, in that respect then, are you okay with the concept of the plan so that we can move the plans forward?
I think we were okay with the concept, weren't we, with Galaxy North? But it's kind of hard to tell without
It's hard to
everything.
tell without some of the details in terms of grading and stormwater and visual. Take a look at the comments and see. I don't know if Andrew's
I mean, I
had a
hate to
chance
go
look at it.
forward with a full grading plan if you're not comfortable with the layout of the
I mean,
project.
It's
I think
very-
it can be engineered, I'm sure it can work, I'm sure it can be engineered, it's, and to me, right now, it's more planning issue, it's the proximity of these residences. Right now, that's what I see as
Yeah.
the impact.
Yeah.
Not, can you do the stormwater, can you get site distance, can you cross the railroad tracks, those are issues that can be
Issues that can be-
overcome.
How much noise is gonna be
Yeah,
aimed at these
I think that's,
people
I
across?
think that's the issue, I don't think it's my
So you're
issue.
looking for a noise
Yeah.
study.
Noise
Yeah.
and visual.
Noise and visual.
I think so.
Yes, Rich?
At some point, you need to approach the town board and get the conceptual approval of a private commercial road, and there's 760 of the code.
Yep,
If this project gets too far in this review.
right, and I guess that's why I'm asking
Yeah.
for conceptual sort of approval, so that we can take that to the next step, because we know that that's something that needs to be worked out as well.
Right, and I think the answer is we feel that the engineering can be worked out, but we'll need these.
These other things, okay,
Okay.
all right.
I have a question. Bill and I were on a project, about 5 years ago or so, on Warren, where there was another bracket, I forget what it was called, bracket, or something else, right on the corner there.
Right.
At 93 Bend. And there was one building on the west side of the railroad, and then we crossed the railroad, and there was a second building, and it seems like this building and the stormwater pond is right where that other building was, on the other side of the railroad.
No, that was it's in between. It's a different lot. It's different property. That one we approved, it never got built.
I know, I'm just saying, you cross
Yeah.
the railroad,
Point
where's
three,
the
I
second
think.
building?
Yeah, there's a lot line between them.
Propina.
No, that's
that's
over
not
by
it.
Mayport.
I
Right?
don't know, it could be further down,
Yeah,
it
it's
seemed
further,
like it to me.
further down towards 84.
The railroad, you have the lot that Engineering Properties is working on now, you have the railroad that bisects and separates those two. It was 4.1, I think.
Was to
4.3.
south of,
Yeah.
was to south of this lot? The second question has to do with, the 915 project. A certain amount of stormwater overflow is going to run across the tracks to this site or into the backyard of the other residential site. We never knew how significant that overflow was going to be across the road.
Well, it's not supposed to be any more than it is now.
That's right.
Okay. It was a very saturated soils. Yeah, it was. I don't know that we've done any more than infiltration as possible.
Haven't done any.
They haven't
soil
done
testing.
anything, so. Bill, do you have a question?
Yeah,
question for Jane on the lighting, but you haven't gotten to that point yet, so.
No,
okay.
but we'll definitely get a lighting plan.
Okay.
for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, very good. Okay, anything else, on the house work? Okay. Here's we'll work down our list. National Builders LP von Rompe Trucking, 134 Neely Town Road Warehouse. We got revised plans the 25th of November.
We actually just got the full site plan today.
Right.
With some literature on the 24th, so I just swapped it out and just came through.
Okay, I know this project, we've had it around for, oh boy, a long time. Yeah. Right, anybody have any comments on, National Builders?
Yes.
Yes, I have yours installed.
Is there any reason, well, could we have a hearing, does everybody feel about a hearing first meeting in January? I think during the process, we'll have to review the SWIP but the building, location has not changed, but, and the utilities haven't changed.
Correct.
There's some grading differences now, I believe.
Right, there's 2 additional parking lots for trucks.
Yeah.
And that's a major change. The amount of parking for the employees went down,
Okay.
so there's a little bit of a swap off there. Lighting is completely changed, so, sorry about that. But, yeah, I mean, the
Entrance
whole.
road, entrance road.
The entrance road, has had some grading changes,
Oh, okay.
but it's in the same location. Yep. There's still a, pull-off for the fire department. We did move that up a little bit. It made sense when we were looking at it to get it on a less steep part of the road. So we moved it up toward the building a little bit, but there is a pull-off there. And,
Got it, the updates, we have this SWIP review and the site plan. So it's been active 2 years and not much has changed from the beginning, I don't think.
right.
We did have a scoping session on it. You have a question, Rich?
Do you briefly want to tell the board that the person that's going to occupy the building, what they're all about, just take a minute?
Yeah, we met with,
That representative is here today, if you wanna talk to Tim, or do you want?
I can just explain real quick.
yeah, if you would, please. Sure.
My name is Tim Cup, I'm with A. Pyle, I'm the Director of Facilities. We had met a month ago or so, Dave, up here. Our Chief Executive Officer was here at the time, and he's better at public speaking than I am. But we intend to own and occupy this building. We've been in the commercial warehousing and trucking business since 1924, and we're looking forward for a continued relationship here in Montgomery.
Right. And I don't believe this is a cross-dock
This is not a cross dock. This is a warehouse operation. We'll own the equipment that's coming in and out. There'll be some outside carriers that come in and out, but we're gonna own and operate the building.
So it's just 20 employees, and I think you said 20, 30 trucks in and out a day, or more than that?
It's probably a little bit more than that. I forget the exact number Peter quoted, so I don't wanna change that number, but the employee count, 25 is what we project for a building this size.
So it's no, pick and pack type of place, it's just out loading?
It's generally a shift a day, 8 to 10, 12 hours. It's not a 24-hour operation. So we'll go quiet and dark at night. Depending on the business that we're gonna put in it, which we don't know yet, the sales force is active soliciting that, but some of that can drive what gets done in the building. Sometimes there's customers that have seasonal demands, if it's a nice milk product or something like that needs to be out to the Lowe's or the Home Depot stores in the winter, but generally it's a one-shift operation.
They bring a product in and they, there isn't any manufacturing or assembly. You know, you drop stuff off and then.
It's a
you know,
it's a
whole-
storage facility.
Yeah, and then they take it out in smaller amounts, but it's still significant. It's not where you go pick something up, they ship it.
Yeah, generally comes in truckload quantities, and may go out in that quantity or lesser quantities to stock store shelves.
All right,
So this eliminates the problem with the close neighbor residents.
You brought the notice at the end of the year for the 13th January, if the board wants to do that.
7:30.
I just had a question. I recall that informational meeting may have had a wider radius than 300 feet.
We have done the information reading, which to 500.
That's what I thought. I would suggest this notice go to the same people
Okay.
and not exclude
Yes.
people right now. And last question, am I saying the notice to Dave or Charlie?
To me, yeah.
Yeah, send it to Paul.
Right on this one. We had asked for like an aerial map showing the site just for the public when they come, so they can kind of see where their house might be for the public hearing.
Okay.
Just because when you look at the maps, it's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell.
Based on the lots, so
And there are-
general vicinity, so people know they can locate themselves.
Sure.
Don't forget the PDF.
I actually brought it today, and I'm just wondering.
Well, I'll take it for this one and the other one?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Give me the, let's try.
So, the January 13th, 2020 at 7:30.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do an aerial?
No, I'm not on there yet, no.
Okay, but bring that next time.
So, just to be clear, we don't need to be here for Monday's meeting.
Your
Oh,
extended
right,
practice,
right, yeah.
So
I'm
not for
sorry.
9:30. We're gonna, not for, 1:34.
Right. Okay, just wanna make sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
KCE New York 2 LLC and KCE New York 11 LLC. Route 17 Kane Browns Road, SCU permit, site plan, battery energy storage discussion. Okay, now, we had adopted a net deck some time ago with the hope that the applicant could follow through with the rest of their permitting. I think it was closed at probably the end of October. 28. All right, there was the MS4 agreement, the DEC and ACOE permit, Army Corps, and the DOT curb permit. How have you made out with any of that, Hyde? Any progress?
Yeah, so I'll let Aaron go into the wetland permit. Kind of why we want it to be on for discussion today is just, through the process, felt like we were told the neg deck was not going to be issued until we were ready for our approval of the special use permit and the site plan review. And so when we received the neg deck on October 28th, then it had the language about the wetland permit being required prior to the final issue of that. Yeah, so I'll let Aaron go into where we are with the wetland permit, with the public hearing and the neg deck, and just administrative approvals left. What we're asking the board is for conditional approval, because what I think the board is saying is that final approval can't be issued, site plan can't be signed, and that permit can't be issued without those permits. I think we're on the same page. I understand that those can't be finalized and issued, but to be held out and without any other documents or review by the planning board and without having that conditional approval, just from a timing perspective, it doesn't work for our project. So I just have Aaron go into a wetland permit now.
Yeah, so once we received the negative declaration, like you said, on October 28th, we were able to submit the New York 11 joint application wetland permit to the DEC and Army Corps. So that was submitted at the beginning of November. At that point, it was circulated to the agencies. right now, they're going through the circulation process. In our experience, takes about 2 months for them to review the application, deem it complete, and then another month after that for them to do their public comment and give the permit. So we're looking at that point for New York 11, the wetland permits being about the February timeframe.
Okay.
And for New York 2, so New York 2 is, as you guys remember, a little bit of a later timeline. We are not planning to construct New York 2 next year. At the moment, it looks like there's an ILF that's going to be approved in this area in the next half year or so, and so we're hoping that New York 2 can go into that ILF, which is why we are not submitting the New York 2 wetland permit at the moment, since it does have that later timeline to start construction.
Okay. And your DOT permit, you already got conceptual approval, correct?
Correct.
Well, before even the neg deck.
Correct.
All right, and our intention with the neg deck was that you could acquire these other permits. And I think that was the idea, and in case there would be some issue with the permits, then we would have an opportunity to amend the site plan, and then we wouldn't be approving something that you would have to come back for. I think that was the idea. Plus, wasn't there a time frame with the Energy Commission with your neg? Did you need that?
So we missed the initial date. We had to make a payment. So yeah, just going back. I mean, and Taylor can jump in after me, but it was we were asking for that neg deck early on, and a lot of it was, you guys need to be ready for your approval. So just for us to get that note in the neg deck, I didn't get a chance to review it until about 15 minutes before the meeting, and so it just took us by surprise in terms of what our timeline is. And since we have 2 projects, one that's not even going to be constructed until the following year, to not have approval, at least, so to me, what you're looking for are conditions to administrative approvals that may impact the site plan. So if they impact the site plan, then it would be, we would have to come back to the board. But if there's no impact to the site plan and the public hearing's closed, I'm not sure why we would come back to the board after receiving those administrative approvals. I mean, a site plan and special use permit should state, must receive DOT approval for curb cuts, must receive wetland permit approval. And if that wetland permit approval for some reason impacts our site plan, then at that point, then we'd have to come back. Yeah.
Right. I don't think there'd be any signature on any site plan until you had your permits.
I agree. So yeah, it's not that we're looking for those to be issued. We're saying that we've gone through the review with the planning board. We've submitted all the required materials for your review for site plan. There are administrative approvals that are still required. Therefore, our approval is conditioned on receiving those. If the site plan for some reason is impacted, to change what you have already reviewed since we've been coming in February, at that point we would have to come back, because at that point we'd have a different site plan. But to just have it hanging out we're not actively before the board, we don't have active submissions, and that's the issue.
Is waiting for the permits holding something up?
Yes.
So I'll let Taylor just talk about timing.
First, to address one other thing you mentioned earlier, as Hyde mentioned, and you brought up, there was a timing issue with our project being able to enter a state program for energy storage. We missed that deadline. That's why we were requesting the neg deck and the special use permit to be separated. By missing that deadline, our company had to make a $700,000 deposit, which luckily we're able to get back. But we had to make that deposit during that approximately month or 2 period after missing that deadline. So I think when I came to the workshop in October and we talked through all of the remaining issues, I think one of my last questions was, under the expectation at that time that we would also be coming before the board for a special use permit, was, what have you all considered any of the conditions of the special use permit? And at that time wasn't told that, was told that basically you weren't prepared to discuss conditions, but wasn't given any indication that we would not be receiving, or the board would not be contemplating the special use permit at that time. But in terms of the timing for New York 11, I think it's important that we look at the two projects separately. New York 11 is a project that our company has been working on really since 2016, one of the first projects we started, and we're very eager to go to construction next year. Due to the wetland permit timing that Aaron mentioned, we would need to essentially receive the wetland permit and complete any other administrative approvals all by March, because any tree clearing would need to occur prior to March 31st. So if we got in a situation where, say, the Army Corps of Engineers or the DEC took even slightly longer, and then we had to come back to this board for a approval at that time, then that could be a pretty significant delay for our project.
Well, Seeker's closed, correct? Yes. We don't have a grading law in the town?
A what?
A grading law or a tree clearing law, let's put it that way.
So this is in relation to endangered bats.
Is this all about the tree clearing? Is that why you want this now?
The tree clearing is probably the major issue. If we miss the March 31st deadline, then the project is delayed by a year.
Seeker's been closed for a month.
But
Go back to trees.
we don't have a project that's been approved, so then we're out clearing trees for.
It's at your risk. Like, we don't have a tree clearing law in the town at
I
this
understand.
point.
Yeah.
I had a neighbor cut 4 acres, he just cleared it. You can't stump it. You can't, till you have your approval, your stormwater, right?
What? I appreciate and thank you for clarifying that for me, but you know, for us to undertake the start of construction on a project would entail, you know, significant expense and risk for our company. So typically we try to start construction after having all of our administrative and discretionary approvals complete.
Would you still need your wetland? I mean, where you're cutting the trees is in the wetland, isn't it?
Some of them.
But
You need to,
I'm just asking from the board's perspective, what an administrative approval that doesn't impact the site plan why you would require us to come back before the board if there's no change to the site plan. I mean, it's just a list of conditions, and it's also, the public hearing was closed on the 28th.
there was a hearing and adopted and named that.
Correct. And so under town law, there's a 60-day time frame to make a decision on our application once the public hearing is closed. That decision could be approval with conditions, or disapproval. So I'm having a hard time understanding the reason to come back to the planning board when these administrative approvals could be listed as conditions to the approval.
Would you have been able to acquire your DEC approvals without the neg deck? Probably not, correct?
We had to receive the neg deck prior to make any of those submittals.
I mean, right, we did the same thing on that, where we, and they went and got their approvals, and then we came back and approved the site plan. It had changed some.
Yeah, exactly. And
But
that's,
this is,
No, we're agreeing that if there's changes that we will come back.
yeah, but the site plan wasn't approved until after the permit. Just like we're doing now.
They'd be at risk to pay more fees if they got a conditional approval and had to come back and change that. They'd have to do the application, right?
It'd be,
It'd be a new application.
because we approved it, I suppose.
And they would need both permits before they can sign the site plan, from what I understand.
That's the thing now, that you still need a permit to do your tree clearing, your DEC.
I think the concern is more if we get that permit late in February and don't get the wetland permits until late in February, or, you know, something happens with the DC taking a little bit longer, and then have to come back, and just that having, you know, potentially less than a month timeline to get that, get the special use permit, and then to clear the trees. The concern is that that timing is close there, and because it's, you know, the wetland permit is up at the DC and Army Corps level.
We normally, we like the permits in place prior to granting approval. That's how we work things, that's how we do things. If the tree clearing is an issue and you don't have your DEC permit, it's a moot point by the end of March, because they're not gonna let you cut the trees anyway. And you can't cut them till you get your DEC permit. That may be the more important permit than our approval at this point. Everybody?
They, I mean, just to cut the trees, it's not like a huge, you don't have to release a contract for the entire project.
I think the DEC won't let you cut a tree even now, even though you could by town law. So they're, you know,
I mean, the issue more is that so, I mean, if we obtain that permit at end of February, your agendas are, you know, very busy, and whether or not we would be back on that quickly. I mean, it's just.
I don't think it'd be a problem on our end if you got your permits on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and we had a meeting the following Monday. I don't think there's anything we have to do other than pass a resolution to grant approval and your SCU permit. We don't need, we would draw a resolution after that, but you could get your permits quickly. I wouldn't say if you got your permit on Friday, you'd come in Monday, but we had a couple of days to review them. I don't think it'd be a problem.
And then for key capture 2, which we're not even submitting until next year, that means that we've gone through this whole review process and we're just not, you know.
What permits do you need for key capture 2?
So it's the same.
What outside agencies?
The same.
And will they won't be issuing them here with these permits?
Correct.
So you're gonna have 2 sets of permits, one for each job.
And that was based on, as Aaron mentioned earlier, the ILF fund. We're working very closely with both agencies and our wetland consultant, and we've been in communication with the ILF fund that's going to be set up. So, you know, we're you know, very confident in the ILF fund, but obviously have to wait until it's set up in order to submit those permits.
It's really confusing with having 2 separate projects in one application. It is one application, I believe. Yes. And you're separating, you're segmenting them out.
Well, we had to do both for secret purposes because they're right next to each other.
Okay. And you have a neg deck on both. One neg deck for both projects. 2 sets of permits though. Is there any reason why you didn't go for the permits for both of them in one shot?
Are you speaking to the wetlands permits, or?
Yeah, the permits that would hold up your approval from us. DOT, DEC, and Army Corps. I don't know if they all apply to both projects, but why did you not go for those permits all at once?
So we are, the DOT, we have been discussing with the DOT both projects at the same time.
Okay.
So the only reason that we're bifurcating New York 2 and New York 11 from the perspective of the Army Corps and DEC wetlands is because of the ILF fund, which is basically a fund that we can pay into in lieu of doing on-site mitigation. That fund is in the process of being set up. We have a high degree of confidence in that fund, and that would allow us to avoid having to do significant on-site mitigation.
And that's due to, so for KC New York 11, the only permanent impact in wetlands is the specific transmission pole locations. It's like 0.0006 acres of impact. But for New York 2, there's the emergent wetland that is partially underneath where the building is located. And so there's a larger mitigation that's required for KC New York 2. And so if that ILF fund is created before we go through the wetland permit for KC New York 2, then we can do off-site mitigation, contribute to that fund, rather than having to do on-site. And so that's the reason we split those 2 up for wetland permits, and that's the only permit where we're doing them separately. Like Hyde said, we combined them for seeker purposes. We had to, because they were on the same parcel, we had to go through seeker for both projects at once to define that.
Deck, as I recall, references on-site mitigation because that's what the plan plans had indicated.
So for New York 11, there's New York 11. We have conversion of forested wetlands to shrubbed wetlands. So we will be converting emergent wetlands to forested wetlands. So there is that on-site mitigation for the New York 11 impacts because the ILF fund has not been set up yet. So there will still be on-site conversion of wetlands to a higher classification of wetlands.
I don't think the board really knows what it's gonna be getting until you get the permits. This is not making any sense to me.
But the mitigation plan is going to be required by DEC. The board is not going to be able to say, we don't like this mitigation plan. We
I
don't like the
understand that,
location."
but we will know what it is.
We'd be
But-
happy to
And we don't-
submit the wetland permit that we submitted to DEC and ACOE so you can see what they will be looking at and what it's, it's the same plans that we've been
So
providing.
we feel that we have a high degree of confidence just based on previous experience with these agencies, working with a really good wetland biologist, that exactly the plan that you all have seen, which is exactly the same as what we submitted in our wetland permit, will be approved. So we're asking for a conditional approval that will happen. If that does not happen and they require something different, of course we would have to come back. But at this point, based on all of our experience, we believe that we will get approval of exactly the plan that you all have seen, wetland-wise, layout-wise, and for that reason, the conditional approval would allow us to proceed much more efficiently early next year.
But I'm very confused on this because if they're not gonna get the permit for the other one until next year, they technically won't be signed site plans until next year. But they're willing to construct the
Wrong site
project without a signed site plan until next year, is what it sounds like.
It's all one site.
It's very
correct. It's not broken out.
Are you phasing it?
It's been, in our EAF, we've stated it's a phased construction. This is not a new concept.
All of the proposed construction dates were in our application from day one.
Yeah.
So we're not approving the site plan, the special use for the whole project, both parts of it at once?
Apparently, they want conditional approval on everything.
Right.
Okay? And then, if in the process of obtaining permits for either of them, they have to come back. And there's a change, and the permitting process requires a change in the plan, then it's understood that they have to come back, we have to start.
So they submitted the DEC permit for 11, but not for 2?
Correct.
Correct. Yeah.
So we can't approve the site plan for the whole thing?
There won't be DEC permits for the second one
Right.
until for a year.
Right. So they have to break it apart if they want us to approve 11 now.
Is it obvious on the site plan that there's 2 phases? Is
So
it
the
phase
site plan
1,
shows
phase
an
2, or is it just in the paperwork?
The site plan will show overall to show the two projects next to each other, and then there are specific sheets for each individual project. So if the issue is whether or not the plans need to specifically be broken out, I'm sure it's something we
Yeah,
can
there's,
provide.
it's one lot, one project.
And the EAF showed the 2 phases. That was where we described the 2 phases.
Well, it's fine that there's 2 construction phases, but unless there's specific maps that say, this is phase 1, this is phase 2, and it's understood from the beginning that they're not gonna be built together, that they're gonna be built a year apart. This is, to us, this
Well, we
is
can-
maybe recent, it's not that, it's not
We
that
can
old.
we can separate it out. It doesn't change the project. So if the issue is that we need plans that are specific to 11 that show, it can put on the plan, phase 2 of project, KC2, show that in the overall parcel, and then have that specific site for KC11.
honestly, I don't know why you just haven't applied for all your permits. You get them, you come in with grant approval, and both of them are done. When you build them is up to you. Then you phase it with the building department. But you have approval on everything, you have all your permitting. And now we're saying now there's even off-site mitigation for the second one?
Offsite mitigation was a forward. I apologize. That was my fault. An ILF fund, we would be contributing to a fund. Taylor, can you go into a better description on ILFs maybe?
So typically, like,
That stands for,
State fund, federal fund?
so ILFs, so this one in particular is basically a third-party conservation group that creates a fund which funds a specific wetland within a geographic area.
Sure.
So I believe in this case it's Ducks Unlimited is actually working on a specific location which is within an acceptable proximity to our project, where basically our payment, and this is approved by the Army Corps of Engineers, our payment would go to this conservation agency and improve wetlands within this geographic area.
Right, I mean, it's,
And just one other comment. If we had received our negative declaration earlier in the process, and so as you all understand it, whether we were right or not, we were under the impression all along that you did not want to submit the neg deck until we got the special use permit. If our wetland permit was being held up by the neg deck, so almost to the day we received that, we submitted our wetland permit. And so if we had received the neg deck a month or two earlier, we would have a lot more leeway here, but because of the timing of the neg deck waiting, it put us on.
No, the reason the board didn't issue a negative declaration earlier is because we didn't have the information that we needed to issue the neg deck. This is not on the board.
From my perspective, it wasn't until board members and Leslie, our consultant, went to that NYSERDA seminar that we found out for the first time all the different plans that needed to be submitted to us for us to approve the project. And that wasn't until, that was just a very short time, like 6 weeks to 2 months before we issued the neg deck.
Actually, there was more to it than that. We were asking for additional information on noise mitigation, and they added noise mitigation. There was more to it than that.
Yes. Well, it was coming at us in steps and surprise, and we acted as soon as we found out, well, that we actually needed to make a decision.
we needed to get information, and we needed to make sure that our concerns were addressed before we could issue a neg deck. Close the hearing and issue the neg deck.
Leslie, my wording was probably not
Okay,
fair.
and that's
I
fine.
simply meant to say that we were
Okay.
intending to submit the wetland permit as soon as we received the neg deck.
Okay, because the board, we were told repeatedly that all you needed was the neg deck, and I don't know that the board had any specific objection doing that, but the board also understood that it needed to have the information to support a robust and defensible negative declaration.
Of course.
That's what we did.
Of course.
Anybody got any idea? I mean,
Right
my
now,
head's spinning with all this stuff.
right now, in order for them to proceed with their funding, we need to get the project separated out, approve the site plan for 11, and then have them submit another application for 2 and come back.
But we have to re-adopt the neg deck too.
My understanding was that it was one project with 2 phases, and that this, as I recall, was how the neg deck read and addressed it as such, and we understood that there were separate permits because the different accesses for DOT alone could have been handled separately. But as far as the other permits went, I think we just as with Matrix, we weren't exactly sure what was going to be involved with some of this.
Some of the permitting.
Some of the permitting, that we needed to see what was gonna happen, just as we did with Matrix. And with Matrix, it did change.
Exactly.
It's kind of an-
They removed some panels. So that's why the permitting is so important prior to issuance of the SEU permit.
But there's nothing that as I see, that would stop you, once you have your wetland permits, from taking down the trees, even if you don't, not stumping is a separate issue. So I don't see that the board's decision or lack thereof is holding you up in any way whatsoever.
It's just,
It
it's
seems
a
like we're going
backwards
in
way to think
circles.
about clearing trees without a site plan.
But-
I mean, the bigger issue is the construction timelines.
But it's
Construction
not
won't be able to start at all until after the site plan really is signed. It's done. Now, you've got one site plan here, and you're gonna have part of this project without even permits. I don't think I can even sign a site plan till all the permits are issued. For both of them, because this is the way it's been presented. It's one project. It's one parcel. It's not.
Application on project.
Exactly.
Two phases.
I think the site plan could be clear, but I don't think the rest of the application, the way the rest of the application was presented, two separate entities, the reason that we considered this as a whole is because we're talking about one parcel from seeker's standpoint that could have those impacts. So to me, the board has considered all that together, which they had to do, because we knew that we were having two projects. And if you need specific, the site plan is not going to change, but if you need a specific set that says this is KC NY11 as a set, then I think that would address what the concern is. It doesn't, our project's not changing. The board has considered both, and so if that's what we need, then I think our engineer can provide that pretty easily.
So, do I understand this correctly? We had to do seeker for the whole thing because you can't segment.
Right.
Okay. The biggest deadline they're facing right now is the trees. Just cutting the trees, not stumping the trees, just cutting the trees. Meanwhile, why don't you submit both sets of permits for wetlands and just do it all at once? Then you got 5 years to do your project. Am I right?
Or
But they've only submitted on the one.
I know. We're giving you the time you need by letting you cut the trees, so now you can just prepare another set of permit applications for the other wetlands and go for the whole thing.
But D.
It's a self-imposed thing that they're dealing with. They wanna wait until there's litigation available.
There's also, NY2 is in, we had to get in the class year, which is what we talked about with the neg deck and everything else. So that's a study, that's a significant investment. We need to construct New York 11 from, but New York 2 is still being studied. We had to get in the class year, that's going through that process. Yeah, and so, but we need to construct New York 11. I understand about the trees, but then we have a cleared lot, and we're still going through that study for New York 2. And so New York 11, even though we have the trees cleared, then you just have a lot with trees cleared that then we're still waiting. You would still hold up the approval for the New York 2 permits. I think if we need separate plans, we can submit those to easily pull out that, show on the plan that it's actually put on the plan that construction timeline, and that would be the New York 11 site plan. We would submit those permits, obtain site plan review and special use permit for that project, and it would be in that resolution, it would state for New York 2, you must submit separate plans that demonstrate New York 2, and once those permits are obtained, then at that point we would go back for New York 2. I don't think it doesn't change.
I think we can agree that it doesn't change.
Yeah.
I mean, a neg deck was issued the end of October, and a decision was made of wherever to apply for permitting for only the one project. Whereas our neg deck and the understanding that evening was clear that before site plans would be approved and an SU permit issued, that you needed all your permitting. Not just on one half. I think we were all under that belief. That was what we agreed to. That's what our neg deck says.
We've never had a condition on any project ever where we considered a condition being approvals from state and federal agencies. It just, our conditions have been lighting or some small technical issue.
Landscaping.
Right.
I think we're going around in
Take that
a
risk, because then you have to go back and make this again, the whole process. So most people don't want to go into it, so.
And you're looking at another month, and then if you haven't submitted the other applications, it's gonna be even longer. And you don't have any desire to apply for the permitting for KCE 2 until.
We're through the class year, which could take up to, I mean, the last class year took almost 2 years to get through.
But so it may be a year before you apply for those permits.
Because say New York 2 never even is is never constructed. We still have New York 11. We had, from a secret standpoint, had to look at both. Those were both proposed, but you can't hold up New York 11 indefinitely for a project that's going through this proposed class year. I mean, the way that we submitted for both entities, stated this is one parcel with these two different projects. The site plan, yes, shows the overall layout that shows both, but it also has individual sheets. So I'm saying, at this point, it sounds like we just have an issue on how the sheets are presented and what can be signed, because right now, we can't sign one that shows New York 2 if New York 2 might change based on those permits, based on those permits. Just, it sounds like what the actual submission is, you need different sheets to show New York 11 broken out, because as we've submitted it right now, it shows everything. If that were to be signed, then you're not getting you're not seeing the permits before 2's actually signed off.
Yeah, for quite a while.
Yeah.
And we don't know if it's gonna change it, if it changes the whole thing, or just 2. I mean, you have
Well, it wouldn't change the
connectivity
whole.
here, correct? Isn't there stormwater that's related? Are there utilities related?
Everything is separate.
They're completely separate.
Stormwater is separate, utilities are separate,
And the entrance is separate.
entrances are separate. It's totally separate infrastructure.
But that's why we're having the discussion, because there was confusion at the end of that October meeting, and that's why we're here in the workshop to work
When we
it out.
adopted the neg deck, I was under the impression, reading, that you were gonna go for all your permitting. Not that we're gonna wait 2 years to go to the other one. You're gonna do it all now. And I figured by now we'd have a good indication of where everything is in your permitting process. It wasn't clear that if it was even stated that we're gonna go for our DEC permit for 2 in 2 years. Right? Am I missing something?
That was my impression as well, honestly, that they were both moving ahead and that there was only,
They're
like
not
a
gonna build the
6 month
other one
that-
right
that-
now,
That there
but-
was a 6 month or so shift between the two of them, and so that they were both going in parallel, but one foot was in front of the other.
And that's our dilemma.
So it seems to me that you really need to submit so that they're separate and they can stand alone.
That's fine. That's fine.
Which means we need to review our neck deck
Oh,
to
we may have to
see.
amend it.
We'll have to amend it because we need to see how or if they relate. From what you're saying, they don't, but.
I don't know why the neg deck would have to be.
Okay,
amended.
but we have to review it because that's what we do. It's the responsible thing to do, and so we will do it.
So this is-
It may be that you're absolutely correct, but.
I don't see a problem. I mean, it's all AutoCAD. It's only $300 for a wetlands permit, application, and just turn on your AutoCAD and make us 2 phases, or 2 separate projects. You already got names for them, you got all the stuff, all the stormwater's done, all the driveways are in, all the utilities are on the
Yeah,
plans. You just need to change the name. And then two approval resolutions, we'll look at the neg deck and see what clauses in the neg deck need to be adjusted, if at all. And we'll go from there. Meanwhile, cut your trees. Or get your permit.
Get your permits so you can cut your trees.
I don't
Yeah,
see
the
a
trees have to be cut in a wetland, they're not cutting them, after a certain date anyway. And, or till they get the permit. If they get the permit, that's so, and you're anticipating permitting done sometime end of January?
January, February timeframe based on our experience to date with DC and Army Corps.
We aren't gonna hold you up. I mean, we can turn it around very fast once you get your permits. I mean, we'll respond if we need to your needs.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
But do I understand correctly that I can submit 2 separate plans showing the distinction between 2 and 1?
What does everybody think? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the only way you can sign a set of plans for the first one.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
separate.
Yeah, without, because the second one's not gonna have the permitting done. They'll need the permits before anything gets signed. And we'll need to look at the neg deck. Right.
Yeah.
So KCE 11 and KCE 2. And, since there's no connectivity, that's good. And then we'll review the neg deck if we have.
The whole connection is where they run the lines, run the 2 facilities through the wetlands.
And those are on separate poles, so they have 2 separate lines that are running up there. So they aren't dependent on each other.
Okay, and
Both
that can be
separate.
shown on the plan.
Yes,
And
yeah.
This is for 1, this is for
Correct.
11, this is for 2.
This is stormwater separate too?
Yep. We have separate stormwater plans and separate SPCCs
Separate
for both
entrances?
projects. We submitted both for 2 and 11 for both of those.
Okay.
It's still under the same application. And it's not really 2 different it's 1 project, 2 phases.
But, I don't know, you signed 2 separate maps.
So one's gotta be phase 1, one's gotta be phase 2. And we have to be able to differentiate that in our document.
Well, call them ACE, what, 11?
Yeah, we can put phase,
We can-
we'll put that on there.
We can
Okay.
clearly delineate phase 1 and phase 2 in our
But I think the seeker was correct, because that, I mean, you can't consider them different. You have to, I mean, because it's the same person. So, I understand it's gonna be.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
look at it. Get us the plans and we'll review that.
Meanwhile, we'll look at the neg deck and,
Once we get the plans, we can look at the paperwork and then I think we'll get back to you. Yeah,
Should we
that'll
say,
make yes,
should
Rob,
we ask
please.
them to send in the second permit to be received?
Well, we'll still need to review everything.
Well, if we're separating them, we only have to sign the first set, if they're.
Well, I understand.
If they're still waiting, if they're waiting on their second class, then I don't, you know, they may want for their own business reasons not to apply for that second one right away. So it may not get built right away or ever.
Maybe a couple
again,
years.
yeah, yeah.
Well, it costs some money to put a permit together. Are we cool?
Yeah, and if there's other information that we can provide, let us know. We're happy to provide any clarifications.
That's fine.
You'll get us the plan breaking out each one, two separate, and, make sure you replenish the escrow, because that's important. And then once we get it, we'll review that according to our neg deck, our secret documents. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We gave them pictures because it was a couple minutes she was in the water, but all of a sudden it's like one of the big things going on. And I'm sorry, but the house is not.
All right, that's 915 Route 17K, Skibitsky, McGurno.
We had minor comments, but I just got a package,
Right.
I got your package today. I don't know why it was so slow, but it was dated like, right before the holiday. I guess the holiday slowed it down.
I think we sent it out either Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah.
Before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so I got it today.
All right, anybody? I know that there's been some discussion over, what special conditions we would want to talk about. And, I think that, I know the landscaping, I guess, has been updated, Larry, and you know, not yet.
No, we had a scheduled meeting with Karen yesterday.
Okay.
At her house, as she requested.
Oh.
She was a no-show.
At her own home?
Yep.
Well, that's where she, yeah, she works, she has a little,
Yeah. Yeah,
next to my place.
we've rescheduled it, but that's why we don't have an updated plan.
Understood.
We would have had it this morning for you had.
That's the one thing I was gonna ask about, cause they, yeah. okay.
And then the lighting plan, you got a revised lighting plan back from the lighting company, Bill.
Got it for me?
They didn't extend the lighting levels out to 0.0. They only stopped it at the edge of the parking lot.
It's okay.
So I asked them to extend it out so you guys can see the extent of the lights, of how far the light would go beyond the parking areas. I haven't received that back, but I mean, if you want, I can, it's just, as I've discussed, it takes about an hour to 2 hours to transfer their product onto our mapping like we like. So I didn't want to do that without having those extra. If you want to see it before then, I can.
What's the difference in time?
I received the lighting plan on Monday, immediately responded and asked her to extend the lighting levels out.
They're in the process.
She hasn't, I would imagine that they are, but I can't say that for sure. She hasn't responded.
Sorry.
I would hope by the end of the week that we would have the new plan.
Oh, fine, we're gonna, okay.
If I don't have something by tomorrow, I'll reach back out to her and find out when it's time.
Okay. All right, thank you.
But either way, I'll get you something either early next week, by the end of this week or.
Okay, please.
All right, a couple of things that, what we've been talking about for a while. talked about special conditions, with its proximity, the project's proximity to the residences, and the public's input in our thoughts also. I know that lot 3 would need to come back, and, there's a use proposed, would need to come back in for site plan approval, so we would have another crack at it at that point. The two things were hours of operation, I think, and noise. I know that our zoning code does give us, there are regulations as to decibel levels at the property line, 57. I know for one project we just approved, we had money set aside to have it tested if there were a complaint, so that the town would have the funds to verify that complaint. Anybody have any thoughts on noise or on hours of operation? We discussed Sundays and holidays. I think it's something that kind of gives, there's some comfort to everyone, not just the residents, but to us too. We also have to consider it is on 17K. Anybody got any suggestions, any thoughts?
Well, I get the idea that they don't wanna limit themselves in marketing materials. But I also get the point that whether anybody likes it or not, two very different uses abutting against each other. And whereas we have to consider the project in front of us, we also have to consider uses around it. And we have to give some consideration to the other uses surrounding the property.
No, I think we should do that. Absolutely. Reasonable.
Well, what do we feel would be reasonable?
I think part of the problem is that we don't know what user's gonna wind up in there, so we don't know what the impacts are.
I mean, it could be something allowed in the use that it would actually be a regular kind of an operation. It could be 6 to 10, or and it's not even, who knows? But I do think from a marketing standpoint, because of that, there's they look at the approval as how do we market this? How do we, what can we put in? And it really isn't our problem. I think we have to be concerned with what our goal, not so much our goal, but our job is and what we're able to do. I mean, what do we want to put in as reasonable? Sundays and holidays? Anything else?
Right, so I think it's a good look, we could have something in there, we don't even know they're around. I mean,
Correct.
you hate to tie your hands on that, but it could be something noisy and everybody would know they're around.
Can we go back to the hours of operation really still revolves around noise. You know,
I would say
trucks running, beepers beeping,
Sure.
doors slamming, and that's really kind of what it comes down to, is just to not have that loud noise 24/7.
Right.
Even though, so are there any mitigation measures in the industry that, well, we know, for instance, there's long-term ambient buzzers instead of beepers, basically.
Sure.
Okay. Door slamming, and Rose lives over there off of Stonecastle, and she reports, right, that in the middle of the night sometimes you can hear.
Land, air, and sea.
What?
Land, air, and sea.
Yeah, so, that's the dilemma we have, but it really cuts down the noise as far as I can tell. And, sure, it's nice to be useful on a Sunday, and I can certainly see, you guys ought to get a Dewey Pyle to come in and do like a satellite warehouse over by you, because they were perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, normal operations. And keep in mind that, you know, the garbage company comes in at 4 in the morning and they drop like a 2-yard dumpster. It's loud, I hear it. Yeah. But I think it's that constant, steady beep, 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 and, you know, opening and shutting. But to loading docks, I mean, since they don't face the highway, I think it'll be minimized quite a bit. But Jay's right, it's I mean, the beep, and you hear that for forever, half a mile. You brought it clear night, the air's just right.
Do we have numbers on the beeps? I mean,
Yeah. I went on Wikipedia, and the backup beepers, you go from 97 decibels to 112.
okay.
According to
Pretty well.
So,
They'd be 80.
they do their job, obviously, but, there must be, there are better technologies. And I'm not, since the buzzers are proven technology, it seems to me that shouldn't be a marketing issue, but, I don't know if you want to try to replace a backup people with a buzzer real easy or not. Is it 2 screws and just change out a unit or what?
Jay, I think we have to err on the side of protection for the residential areas. We just have to make sure the beast knows what's going on. I think we have to do that. So it's not Sundays or half-a-day Saturdays, you know, or for instance, holidays.
Sundays, holidays, we use shushers?
Isn't the problem that the over-the-road trucks have to have beepers, am I right about that?
Probably.
And that the size of these warehouses may not lend themselves to on-site trucks
Right.
that could be shushers.
Right.
I think that's another dilemma to add to your list. And again, it turns on the tenant. I wonder, is there a way to give them some level of permitting, like see if hours and noise will be an issue upon delivery of a particular tenant or use? As a way to get out of the mire here? I mean, the board has to advance this, you know, the time hearing, subdivision hearing closed the 28th of October. So, you know, this is
We gotta move this along.
There's also things like shift changes. You know, if you have a shift change at 3 a.m., you've got 57 cars leaving the parking lot within 20 minutes. So everyone's coming out, slamming their car door, starting their engine, and walking on the tenant down the road to get home.
Does Rich, does the board approve a project with some time constraints? And if the end user is going to be quieter, less disturbing, and they can prove it with a noise study, so then they don't have to put up supplemental noise restraints, a sound wall, a sound fence, which we've done on some projects. Would the board, I mean, get some level of approval, let them take that to their prospective buyers.
Right.
And then if the buyer needs something more, then just come back and say, listen, look, my business needs this, and I'm proposing this mitigation to relieve that impact.
Fred, on lighting, we have something that is installed, and it may have to be changed after the fact, under conditions. That's on every print.
Okay, yeah, they have to come back if it changes. How could we word our approval document to give us leeway when we know who the tenant is? That's basically what we're.
Set a tentative situation and then try to be a little bit flexible under certain conditions.
I don't know, is that something we could do under seeker? or noise constraints?
Well, if you incorporate measures that resolves the noise concern, and I would need to work with Andrew on this one, then that could be a part of the approval, and if a future user proves not to need that and can so demonstrate, then they can come back to modify the approval. But simple. Eliminate those measures.
Do we want to set some limits on hours of operation and noise because of the noise? And what are they? I think that's what we need to know in order to draft the document.
But the limitations would be on the noise, not on the hours of operation.
They can be tied together with this.
Well, they could load trucks at night, not necessarily backing them up to the docks or driving them away or something. If they were willing to do such a thing, whoever the tenant was.
Well, our zoning requires you're not to exceed 57 decibels at the back property line, regardless of zoning.
Right.
And could we have something that allows us to look at that if there is a complaint, like we did for the other project, for ASAP? I mean, would that?
With ASAP is that
It's
there are some, it was in that specific section, that was in it, specific to the use.
Right.
That's the only problem with this.
And so the 57 doesn't pertain then to?
Technically, it's only for recycling facilities, which is why it applied to ASAP.
Right.
That said, I think it's a fairly good benchmark for noise.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that it was so many dBL during the day and then it reduced at night. I'll get that one in a second. I think it might have been 57 and 47. It was definitely a time frame. At 10 o'clock at night, it went down 10 decibels.
Almost there.
Would that be something that we would look at rather than, because it could be a very inert type of operation, bread truck. They may not even operate on weekends. It could be like,
Just bigger. 57 decibels, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., 47 to 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Now, admittedly, recycling only, but noise is noise.
would that be something that, instead of worrying about hours of operation, and just maybe have that, the limitations?
Noise on the site is separate from noise coming in and out of the site as well. Is there a way to maybe restrict shift changes overnight hours or something like that, that would maybe limit some off-site noise?
Some of that, again, would be specific to the use though, wouldn't it? I'm just thinking about, the Orange Ironworks, which was before your time, I guess.
No, I think it was here.
Okay. Okay, you know, that they had the loading and there were certain uses that didn't take place outside. But they needed to be out on the road by, yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying restricting all traffic, overnight, I'm just saying, yeah, if you schedule your shifts, let's say start at 9 o'clock and then get out till 5 in the morning, I don't think that's a huge load.
Right.
Depending on the use, obviously, because we don't know what the use is, but if someone's coming at 3.
Yeah, that's a little different than.
And the two warehouses won't be independent.
Go with DB, Fred. We've got to have our own. Sorry.
What we would want is, we would want the provision so that we would be able to address, not address it, but we would be able to take a reading if it were to be a problem, sort of like what we did for the other one. Does that make sense? And do,
Once you identify it, is there a mitigation that has to be done, or what's the?
Yeah, sure.
And what's the, is there a focus maybe, or?
I think once they violate their SEU permit, I think that would give us some.
For ASAP, we set it up where the building department would obviously be able to access this monitoring fund if they felt we needed to, prior in response to neighbors' complaints. If there were no complaints,
Please come and respond to those complaints.
I think that might be a question.
Now, if we specify non-nuisance use, which I think we typically do in these small warehouses, does that apply to noise?
Nuisance is a tough term in the law.
Well,
You
that's
tell
my
me
question, yes.
what's a nuisance to you might not be a nuisance to me.
Right.
So that's a hard one. And our warehouse SU permit is actually not non-nuisance industry.
Okay.
I think nuisance only shows up in the industry context, not the warehouse.
So do we want to do something similar like what we did with ASAP for Newlands? And then maybe limit shift changes to none between 9 and 5? Is that something that we would be agreeable, would we consider, or is that something we can?
Maybe the applicant could get back to us in an email, because they're sitting here listening to all this, and I'm sure
Yeah.
they have some input. But,
Yeah.
and this is pretty much on for a decision, what, in January 13th?
I think by then we would have the opportunity to run that down.
We gotta pull this together by then. Monday nights too tight.
Then you need an extension.
62 days runs out about the 30th of December.
We have a late workshop.
January 8th.
It'll be.
And the meeting will be 13th.
Yes,
Okay, so. Okay, got that? So instead of limiting what day, just noise, and, if we could do something with shift changes, so they're not the middle of the night?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
So if we were to limit a shift change, what would be so like a 10, like if they go in 8-hour intervals, you don't wanna have a shift change at 5 a.m. in the morning or 4 a.m. in the morning. So if we had the shift change at, let's say, 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., it would be done before, it wouldn't occur until 6 a.m. in the morning, which is a reasonable time for a shift.
Yes.
So we would limit so we could agree to limit the shift change, no shift change after midnight or between midnight and 6 a.m. or 11 and 6 a.m.
Yeah, something
That was
like that.
reasonable. Yeah, I think that we can live with that.
And
And as you had suggested properly, all the brokers in the area have said to us, you really can't market your site until you get an approval. So we haven't really had the opportunity to go out. The only piece that we really forced that on was lot 3, because we didn't want to have a comfort level that we could demonstrate that somebody would be interested. And that person obviously will come to you for approval once we get a preliminary, or whenever you say it's time for them to come in.
Okay, all right, and because the 62-day after we close the hearing will elapse by the end of the month, if we could get a letter asking to extend this out to the 13th of January, we'll look to make a decision then.
Before it's adopted, yeah, by that date, our concern, we have extension payments due to the seller that have been accruing since we started it. As you might imagine, much larger after this month, so it's now costing us a lot more money to continue on with this process. We certainly would like to get an egg deck if we could get that next week from why
That's
the issue that. Just on that topic, one of the conditions that you haven't mentioned is an extension of the existing water district for fire suppression purposes. That's gonna require a petition to your town board and a public hearing from them. We would expect that would be a condition of your approval, but I can't even get there without a neg deck, because their decision's gonna be subject to seeker as well, if you're the lead agency, so.
Have you petitioned?
We haven't, what's the point? I can't get a hearing out of them, so I'm not petitioned.
Check with the town attorneys, but, I believe Medline's petitioned a long time ago, and there's been no finding statement, and the town board cannot take a decision, obviously, without seeking.
Right. I can file the petition, but I don't see the point in it.
Well,
It's
that's up
just
to
gonna sit
you,
there.
but, as you know, the district creation or extension process is a process.
Yeah.
And the sooner you can get going on it. But I would agree, this board has conditioned the creation of districts as a condition of approval.
Yeah.
I just have a quick question for Andrew. I used to drive by the Orange County Airport, there was a landfill there, and it had a bunch of pipes coming out of the ground preventing methane, which is kind of organic material, I guess, that decayed, and you had voids created. Which obviously was cave-in and the weight on top of the soil. Is this a situation that you're gonna run into with operation?
I have no idea. I mean, right now, the last report showed maintenance and, you know, the same, levels, a leveling off, I guess, if you will. We showed no additional impact from what they submitted to DEC. There is, further DEC, review that goes on. The remediation that was mentioned was, you know, some bare soil areas that they thought should be seeded just to avoid erosion. But as far as cave-ins or anything, I have no knowledge of anything like that at all.
They only intended to gravel a small section over by lot 2 or 1, I forget that.
There's, it's
So,
like, it's a little bit, the landfill's a little bit different than Orange County area, the landfill. This is not an organic material. landfill.
Right. We don't know whether
This is
it's-
C and D landfill.
Yeah, but we don't know whether there's like stumps and stuff which would decay.
But that, it's all in the monitoring of the cap, but there is no methane, leak.
I know there's no fence, yes.
So I don't suspect that would be an issue.
Just one last thought, when we're walking through this on 915 and 70K, Galaxy across the street almost, and backing up on residences on Barron. So we're gonna have this all over again, so this is kind of real important. We get a good standard for this project.
Yeah.
Going forward.
Now, we've had a number of voluntary time limits on other projects. But whether they volunteered because they were aware that we got the residential, I don't know.
I think it was
But it was
because
voluntary.
they had end users and they knew what their business model was.
It's interesting, and we're gonna get to it on the agendas here today, is that Autumn Sky Warehouse, North Drury, has offered hours of 5 in the morning to 11 at night. So telling me that he must think that the restriction on those after-hours operations would not hurt his marketing unless he's already found time.
Yeah, you didn't want to do it for the store, so.
Right.
One more question. I know we talked about this, but since there's 2 different warehouses and potentially 2 different buyers, is there anything that defines what needs to be constructed if, say, lot 1 is purchased, but not lot 2 and we want to build, or vice versa?
Everything.
All the stormwater needs to be built.
Stormwater.
Defines the limits of that? or-
No.
It's all cross easements, so they all have to do it.
Well, one condition will be acceptable common access maintenance agreement. And we suggest that the private sector propose to us what they think works, what's the fair allocation among the lots, because as long as it equals 100%, I would think it's the municipality's business to tell them, well, lot 2 should pay 33%. And we have a very brief, very small template for common driveways meant kind of for two-lot residential subdivision.
Right up to the applicable here, if you don't have anything, I'll send you to get started on it.
Yeah, I think it's
It's
important.
gonna be a condition of approval anyway.
It
so-
will be, but it probably should go with the filed plat, just like every common driveway agreement is shown on the subdivision, so it all goes to the county at once. And Sue can send you our 3-page template for some of the whereases, or you can run with your own document. But Ryan's point's a good one, the first guy in, you know, it's not really our problem as long as we know it gets done. Right. And I think that was your point.
We need to know that like the correct stormwater is constructed and the correct entrance and all this other stuff. So I just wasn't sure if there's anything defined that you need to build the entire stormwater pond or.
Let's talk about that, Larry, just for a minute. The phasing appears such that, I'm looking at the phasing plan right now. Phase 1 is the pond. Phase 2 is essentially the roads. 3 is, I'm not sure if 3 is it's towards the back. All right, so 3 and 4 are the buildings. 3 is the building by 17K, 4 is the building that's farther away. 5 is the office building. Is there any reason, I mean, if once you do 1 and 2, then you have your choice of doing 3, 4, or 5, pretty much, right?
Yeah, there's.
Yeah, so it is kind of broken up that it could be separated if 17K building does not go right away, then you could do the other 2 buildings or 1 building. That's how it's set up. The utilities are such that they're running in the road. The 1 stormwater pond is suitable just for that phase 4 and also for the phase 5, which is the office building. Phase 3 has that additional piece onto that stormwater pond, that forebay.
Say like the landscaping firm on 17K.
Would
say lot 1 is sold, it's built, and then 10 years go by and lot 2 still isn't built. I don't think that would be the case, but you never know. Is that landscaping berm supposed to be constructed up front?
The landscaping berm at the terminus of the roadway would be done, but where it extends around where the building would not be. That would be in that phase, which makes sense. I mean, it would probably, if you did it earlier, it would probably be damaged when you did the building.
I know that we discussed the berm and the plantings out on 17K to have that done early on in the project. And I think there was, I know we discussed it. Did we come up with a conclusion, Larry?
We had discussed the installation of the berm, and then the plantings would be installed towards the end.
Yeah, because you don't want to disturb the trees.
Because the berm extension that would go around the north side of that building or in between the building and 17K would not be built until that building was done, and also the landscape. Just at the end of the dead end, at the end of what would now be the dead end road.
So the building down Bracken could be built and there would be no berm?
That's correct. There would be a berm at the end of the roadway.
Well,
Here.
just.
That's how it's shown.
For clarification purposes, this phasing plan was developed assuming that basically you'd be having simultaneous construction of both facilities. So we weren't trying to do one without the other. It was really what would be, and obviously, Andrew, as you fully are aware, the SWIP phasing plans are often, they get evolved as you go through the process. Because a contractor may run into an issue in one site and need to alter the phasing plan slightly to accommodate another area of construction. But I know that we did indicate at the public hearings that the berm would be constructed early on in the process. With that, but the landscaping plan itself, the landscaping on top of the berm would not be installed until later on. I do not recall, without my notes, whether or not that was indicative of the building being constructed, or if it was just construction on the site.
That phase two could be extended to go down and do that entire berm, if it wouldn't be disturbed when the building was done. It looks like it could be done. The phase for doing the roads and some of the stormwater improvements is 3.5 acres, so you can still be under the waiver, and you know, it could be done at that time. It's not indicated as such at that time. I know it wasn't. I know this plan's purpose wasn't to, now we're gonna do this one and not that one, but that was the direct question, and could it be done? Yeah, it looks like it could be done.
And the reality is that there is, you know, the Route 17K lot requires a substantial amount of material being removed from it to drop it down in elevation. So it's really, if it doesn't get built and the lower lot gets built on, you have even a larger berm in between the lower building and 17K, just through the natural topography. That isn't necessarily, you know, constructed, it's just naturally there. Obviously, we would have to install stormwater basins, and that would dig into the backside of that steeper bank on that lot, but you would still have that elevated area in between the Bracken Road warehouse and 17K.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is, you know, we're looking at the site plan as a whole, and while I don't think there's gonna be any issue constructing both of these, if you don't ever build lot 2, then the parking spaces from lot 1 are facing 17K, and they may be for some time, and that's worst case scenario, obviously. If you build lot 2 first, you don't have that problem.
So then, the board's discussion on noise is, any one of the buildings is built, noise study is done, if it's deemed to be required. If there's a complaint, then the noise, you know, doesn't have to happen before that. And maybe better to happen when just the one with the
everything
base facing that direction, yeah.
And you have a considerable silting problem if you don't cut out 17K lot at the start. And
Silting?
if you don't cut out that hill by 17K.
Right.
Or the 17K building, when if you do it later, you can have a considerable amount of silting coming into the stormwater retention as you clear the lot, because you don't really have the construction silt detention ponds on the site.
I understand your concern.
Yeah.
And that would certainly have to be addressed on the site locally. What I think, if I can rephrase it, Rich is concerned that you'd have final stormwater basins that would be subject to siltation if the Bracken Road lot was built, constructed, everything's done, and now you start gouging the hill, we could get siltation down into those basins. And obviously, Rich, from that standpoint, either other measures would need to be instituted, or you know, temporary sediment basins. You know, there's a lot of ways that we can address that, and the SWIP gets adjusted on almost a weekly basis for large construction projects to deal with these types of situations.
And that's one stormwater pond is getting it from all of the development. So perhaps if just the building that was farther away from 17K was being built, perhaps you could run a couple of numbers and say, you know what, we only need 2/3 of that base, and let's use the rest of it for sediment, or, you know, you can.
There's a lot of ways we can address that during the process.
Okay. All right, great. I think we're game plan.
Just, Mr. Chairman, two things. The date for your request for extension was January 11th.
Well, by the end of this month, I think.
The 13th is when the board meeting.
And back to the question about the net debt. Board issue, feeling ready to issue a net debt next board meeting?
We wouldn't be ready on Monday, sorry, on the ninth.
It would be,
We just have a financial incentive if there's any possibility.
I can't see how I would without, a little more communication with Karen Aaron's. I think that part of the plan is kind of, this is all going together as a piece, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Is there any way, we have a second meeting in December?
No, just one more.
I understand. You guys have worked real hard, so thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing that you're all here on a Wednesday morning.
Yeah.
We give you a lot of credit. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Next, Autumn Sky Development, Inc. Public hearings adjourned to, Monday at 7:40. I think there's some work needs to be still done on the mapping.
We submitted, comments, Leslie and I both, and we had some conversations on this. I got another submittal, I think, this morning. 20 megs of drawings and, you know, I got another submittal from Mike, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know if he even got the comment before he submitted, I have no idea.
I have
Yeah.
a lot of it.
Fred, I just want to say one thing, and I think Leslie will agree. I don't want to hear from Mike that we've had 9 reviews, because we actually numbered the reviews on this, and they're numbered for pretty damn good reason. I'll let you know, all right?
And there, they have, there's.
I think Leslie feels the same. If I can speak for you.
There's a motive to why this is developed this way, and there are definite reasons, so.
And it's fun, but like even with the subdivision, there are some issues that we kind of alluded to with 915, that there are issues that need to be brought up and dealt with, and just because he's put off dealing with some of those by saying, oh yeah, we'll do it, doesn't mean that those issues go away, and he really needs to review and respond to the comments in detail instead of just put something together.
Put
so
something
that
together and get it out.
it's-
I
It's,
I
he
just
needs
got
to be
Leslie's
responsive instead of just
second
saying.
Are gonna get into it.
We have this time last night.
Yeah.
It's a patient who had on collection.
All right, then I'll send it.
All right.
He's trying to show you 2 ways of traffic, but it does have stop.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, because I think I think the 208 is
Leslie and I had a call. Oh, we had a call.
I was confused with this is unkind.
Oh, it's the 208 one.
Yeah.
Andrew, we just got the 208 one, did we get the one on 17K?
I think we gave them. Yeah, we're gonna talk about, yeah. On North Drury, the one we talked about.
Okay. Okay.
Just for the.
Now on Medline,
Just one last thing on Autumn Sky. The legal notice is really messed up. And in fairness to the applicant, Town of Newburgh wouldn't give him a 300-foot radius, only a 500-foot radius. So he had to take a map and figure out which of those on the list he didn't have to send a notice. And I'm trying to wade through this stuff. There were like 80-some mailings. I redid the notice for him and sent it to him right before Thanksgiving for December 9th, because I think he might have missed one or two. So hopefully on the 9th, he'll come in and clean all that up. If he doesn't, maybe have another one. So it's too bad when he's right on the Newburgh line. So the 15 notices in Montgomery were no problem. 58 to 68 in Newburgh are challenged. And I have them, so I'm not giving them back to you, so I can all.
Okay, good.
Well, actually, don't forget, we opened the hearing. I don't think anybody.
Not even if zoning board, say what the hearing for zoning.
Like, they didn't think they had to go and find it.
They did though, but, Stephanie didn't want to check the notices.
Okay, we're gonna reopen the hearing on Medline this evening.
Right here?
Yeah. At 7:30. We'll take comment. I will announce at the beginning of the meeting that, we received the draft FEIS, and, the applicant received our comments on that document, early this week. And, they need to respond to them and resubmit the document. And once that document is complete, we'll do like we did for Sailfish, I won't have to say that, but we will deem it complete and file it and get it in the public's domain, be it online, it'll be at the library, and set a public comment period. The hearing will remain open through this process until we get further along, and we won't have to give a date or anything. They were gonna get back to me with a date, we went to reconvene, they also wanted to close the hearing tomorrow night, tonight, which I didn't even respond. We're not gonna close the hearing on the site plan with the FEIS. Yeah, it'll be in the libraries and it'll be online, on the town webpage, like we have done with all the other documents for these large projects. They have your lighting letter, they have our comments, separated out from each individual. Thank you very much for your comments, and our consultants' comments, and we're working through them. So I think that, they've got some work to do yet on the FEIS. It's not complete, we don't know when, and I have communicated to the applicant that we won't have another meeting this month. We have a meeting on the 9th, and after that, we'll get to January 15th, that's all.
Tonight, you have to, by motion, pick a date and time to adjourn the hearing, obviously, for the continuity. And the concern, and maybe we'll hear from the applicant, concerns we fall in the Sailfish trap where every 2 weeks we're rehearing this matter while we're waiting. And I'm not sure after a while, but even the folks that were coming were probably tired of coming, but we kept having to do. We went out with 2-week jumps, remember?
Yes.
All
Yeah,
summer,
yeah,
basically.
like 10 or 11.
Yeah, so that's a factor to think about. Because tonight, before you leave this room tonight, you have to pick a date and time.
FEIS complete, set the public comment period. Whether or not we wanna have them come in on the 13th, we're not gonna have it, the public comment period won't be over by the 13th, and we won't have a finding statement.
Well, here's the other issue. When the document is ready, in your opinion, by resolution at an open meeting, you have to deem it complete and file it. So the first time you could do that, yes, the FEIS, the first possible time you can do that is the 13th. But that doesn't mean that you're gonna close the hearing the day you filed the document. The whole point was. So, I mean, I'm just think about it during the day today, because you have to figure this out tonight. You know, at best, this hearing probably has to go out at a minimum to the end of January, I'm thinking.
Well, assuming we get the next draft FEIS, are we going to be satisfied with it?
Correct.
Exactly,
We
it's
go
gotta
for
be.
another round.
And it takes a while to wade through this stuff, as we all know. So we have to build in our own review time, and we don't know when we're going to get draft number 2. It could be next week, it could be a month.
It won't be before, well, I'd be surprised, it could be the end of next week, but needless to say, we're not gonna have, personally, I think if in a perfect world, what's possible, but we don't wanna offer it. The 13th, maybe we could deem it complete and set the public comment period. That's why I'm thinking the 27th would probably be, I'm kinda leaning towards that, to reconvene a public hearing on the site plan. You know, and the other thing is we got the holidays coming up, and we don't wanna tell the public over the holidays, you gotta review this thing. We'd rather have them, okay, snowing outside, I'm not doing anything anyway, get on my computer and I'll see how my questions were answered, how everything's been addressed on the site plan.
One of the comments disturbed me a little, I'll be interested in your response. Someone questioned whether the site plans would be accessible online. And the answer was, well, we think so, but if not, they can be foiled. And my reaction was, I don't know that that's appropriate to make a citizen have to foil a site plan. And that was the response that we had in the current document, which is just one tiny example of where I think we have to make sure, but like, why couldn't they be online? Why would you even mention that someone could always foil it? That's just, I didn't get that.
Have they made any noise about assembling the record? That's the right term, I guess. That's the term that Sailfish did. He started putting together basically the basis for the finding statement.
I haven't heard anything about that.
I mentioned, what I mentioned back almost 3 weeks ago now to the council for the applicant was we were more comfortable following the series of events like we did for Sailfish. FEIS is complete, set a public comment period, which is longer than prescribed by seeker, which is, I think is 10 days.
10 is.
So we went out more, 20. Then, not to say that's what we're gonna do here, but longer than that time. During that time, the applicant's attorney drew up a finding statement, which we had to review and change and clean up. And that was, we didn't close the hearing until that was ready to be adopted. So that's how, you know, what we're looking at. So, I mean, that's why in a perfect world, with the timing, if we had a second meeting this month, maybe we could deem it, but, you know, we're killing ourselves. Been like this whole year. You rush and you make mistakes. That's the problem. Everybody pretty much.
Well, it's an extremely complex project on a very difficult site. It's gonna take time to get it right.
Andrew, I didn't have a chance to read your comments, but I assume you have substantial comments.
We do, I think, yeah.
Like, not just cleanup items.
We still haven't gotten over the hump of, there is zero infiltration on that site. That isn't gonna go over. I talked to Natalie Brown, DEC, she says that is absolutely not in keeping with the code, with the stormwater permit period, and,
Is it because they're treating the whole site as a hot spot?
Yes.
And why are they doing that?
there's no good reason for that.
No.
Every other applicant with a warehouse or an industrial project in the town of Montgomery has segregated, so that they have hotspot treatment, which is more costly. It's more, requires more detail, more mitigation. Put that over here and then treat the whole or the rest of the site conventionally, and they're not doing that.
But you still need infiltration in your hotspot treatment ponds.
No, absolutely not.
How are
Absolutely.
you separating?
It's
that?
going through a filter media in this particular case. There's absolutely zero infiltration for hotspots runoff.
Now, is the silt coming down into these ponds considered like a toxic waste?
No, silt from where? Silt after construction or silt during construction? What are you talking, where is the silt coming from?
Well,
You know what I mean? Where does it come from?
well, I don't know, they're talking about cleaning out the silt from the ponds. Maybe that's just during construction, but.
Yeah, I mean.
Be more typical.
Yeah, I mean, silt entering the ponds after construction is virtually nil. I mean, you're gonna have a vegetated site and a paved site, you know, so I'm, you know, most of those that.
But, so we understand,
Yeah.
runoff from the roof is going into hotspot.
The runoff from the roof is going into basically a swimming pool. It's got an impervious liner in it, and there's just no good reason for it. I went back to the geotech report, which was called preliminary, which had a map on it that showed 2 stormwater basins. There are currently now 7. The map was distorted. It was like it was squished. So it's very difficult to see where those tests were done based on that map. But they did 3 tests where that would be woefully inadequate given the amount of testing that's required in the Stormwater Management Design Manual. The other thing the board's got to understand is, given the size of the building and the size of the site and the amount of impervious cover, one of those stormwater basins is the size of a football field with end zones. You got to understand how big some of these stormwater basins are.
Over 1 million gallons.
You got to look at the scale of this thing, and then, you know, we just for kicks, we drew what a football field looks like on the paper plan, and it was oh, look at that, fits. Yeah, and there's
So-
quite a few of them.
So they're collecting stormwater and are they releasing it over time?
Yeah,
to the
in
river?
a lined basin, yeah.
So how is it being released if it's not infiltrating and?
Through the outfall. The only way out is the
When it's filled
outfall.
up,
No, not when it's filled up.
okay.
Through the outfall, depending on where the outfall is. So it's
there's
the
a-
only way out.
There's a filter, the way out is through a filter media to an under drain to the outfall, is that what it is?
The under drain is underneath the liner to make sure that the liner doesn't float.
Okay, so.
So there's
The hotspot?
there's a bathtub with a drain in it, period. The water can either evaporate out of that bathtub or it could go through the drain, that's it. There is no going through
So how does
the
it,
ground.
how does it treat the hydrocarbons or whatever?
Well, if we're talking about the hotspot, it's going through the media. There is media in there,
Okay,
you know?
some sort of a peat or something that
Yeah.
grabs onto the
Yeah.
hydrocarbons?
Yeah, it's your typical biofilter, you know, on
Said
all of these
everything, the whole
things.
thing's a hotspot.
They're designing it, they're designing all of the basins that with an impervious liner inside. They're saying, when you go back to the geotechnical report, they did 3 tests and they're saying that there's either high groundwater, high bedrock, et cetera, but I just feel that 3 tests are completely inadequate for
this.
a project of this scale and size.
So they're controlling the flow of stormwater into the wall field by the size of the pipes coming out of the detention basins?
Control structures, et cetera, yes. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
There's
So they're
towers in
releasing
there.
it over a period of time?
Yeah.
The size of the pipe.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, that and the media, yeah.
But what's
Yeah.
with the 45 square foot culvert under the road?
That as, they are not required, they're not required to do peak flow mitigation on this, because you got a 5th order stream. So they could let more water into the stream than gets there today. That's very unlike all of the projects that you have, because of where it sits.
Right.
They're taking advantage of that. I agree with them being able to do that in the basin. That we asked them to do the downstream analysis. That was the other thing.
Wow.
Ryan asked them to do it, I asked them to do it. I think you might have asked them to do it as well.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about whether they understand that the river flows north, not south.
Yeah, that's completely irrelevant, to the study, completely
I
irrelevant.
mean, you got a bottleneck up by, you said the bridge Walden, so.
This is, yeah, we're getting into very complicated hydrology,
Yeah,
hydraulics, Richard.
I know, it's way past me and
The idea is to let the peak get out of the site before the peak of the river gets there. You don't want them to coincide. That's the idea, and it's a very good idea.
Right.
I mean, the peak from the river's coming from Jersey, so.
No, I understand that there's
The black dirt.
40 miles below us of river that's collecting stormwater runoff.
So I'll address it, the crowd. We will have a sign-up sheet, hopefully a policeman will be here. I did ask the chief for that a week or so ago. Yeah, well, I'll announce that rather than have an hourglass. It didn't seem like we needed it before.
Right.
We may have more or less, I don't know what kind of a response will be from the public tonight, but, you know, we have the evening for it, and whatever comments we have, but I will address the public tonight to explain where we are at, maybe what I will do, I'll do that first, maybe if Larry Olinsky, I'm sure, will be the spokesman for, Medline, and they may have something to add to that. And then when we finish, we have to decide when we're gonna reconvene here. Okay? That's about it.
Andrew, we've never done this, but it seems like I, and maybe some of the other board members are really confused about what's going on with stormwater on this project. I just wondered if some of us could come over to your place for an hour or something and get an
Sure,
explanation of
we can do
what's
that. Yeah, sure.
going on.
You're always welcome, sure, of course. We've done that before.
All right.
One last question for tonight. So typically, this is a forum for the public. But, does the board think it wants to, you know, start making its own record? I mean, for example, all the comments that just went out, should they be even mentioned tonight or not? I mean, don't forget, this is a public hearing on a special use permit, and the FEIS comments really bleed over into the overall permitting. I mean, it's impossible to segregate a comment. Well, that's just secret, that has nothing to do with the approval. Right. So just think about it. I'm not adverse to saying this is completely for the public tonight. But there a lot of work went into these comments, and they're really not in our record when you think about it, right? They were sent to the applicant, but they're not in our record.
If the public is brief like they were before, an hour, hour and a half, I'll ask the board, do you have any comments to add? And if anybody feels like saying anything, or I don't know how technical Leslie or Andrew would want to get into any comments, it wouldn't be bad. I mean, because the public's not going to see everything that we have to say.
That's my point.
You know,
I'm not advocating, I'm just throwing it out there, and again, with the hearing adjournment, there's time, a month from now, presumably, we'll see where we're at. But I think two things, it's important when we go to do findings that we don't pull them out of thin air, that they were stuff that was put in the record. So I think, you know, that's real important. And secondly, I think it shows the public that we're not just sitting here saying yes to everything we hear.
I think that's what they think.
I believe that's exactly what they think.
Exactly.
We don't do a good job of showing them what we're doing.
Well, we typically let them talk and don't talk.
Understood.
I think the finding statement spoke volumes when you went through it for Sailfish.
Yeah.
Although I think that for the public at least to understand some of the concerns that are outstanding with respect to the drainage, the stormwater management is critical, because for both of these big projects, those are the, not the only item, but a key item of interest.
You do the finding statement?
I'm not doing anything yet in the finding statement because it seems premature until they can straighten
I agree with
out
that.
the FEIS
Okay.
responses, because they were.
Gentlemen, you had,
Yeah,
was it
so-
a couple minutes with, project on 52, Von Nostrand's
Yeah.
building?
Yep. 827 Van Nordstrom property, over on Route 52. I have a client looking into, this is James with, Augusta Glen Partnership LLC. They have a question on use. I believe it's not, it's nothing, not gonna be an issue. It's, if you wanna explain what they do.
So Augusta Glen Partners has a few companies, we're located in New Jersey, Mahwah, New Jersey now. We're
Okay.
looking to relocate to New York. We do a military project, so we do thermal military targets for the US government. It's light assembly, light manufacturing, really no noise involved in the process at all.
Okay.
Shipments out once a month, maybe. So really no impact noise-wise. We also do high-end vehicle storage. So it's mostly a personal collection, really not any traffic, some cars sitting there for years without even being turned on. It's not much in and out of anything.
Okay.
That's basically it.
Any new construction?
No new construction, just haven't had we're on a timeline of a straightforward.
In the whole facility then?
Whole facility's 43,000 square feet, this would be 7,200 square feet out of it. At an end unit, there's also a 3-hour burn wall already in place on that end unit. Haven't had a direct answer, so I figured we streamline it and, propose it to you guys and see if you have any issue with it. Or we'd like to move forward on that lease.
Number of employees?
In the facility, under 5.
Hours of operation?
Right now, our hours of operation in New Jersey are 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Saturday, limited hours, maybe 8 to 12.
No Sunday, or no Sunday and no holiday?
Usually no Sunday, no holiday. If we have, a deadline for a project, we might come in and work, but again, we're really non-intrusive to anything that's going on.
This is a Von Ostrand's warehouse.
Yeah.
There's a
Existing.
portion of it,
Existing one.
and Walt had asked him to come see us if we had any problems, because it's a bit of a change of use, but I don't think it's really anything we wanna, I don't think we have a problem with, anybody got a problem with
It
it?
seems like ideal use for this typical site, yes.
No, this
No,
is
it's the existing one.
This is the
Oh,
existing
okay.
site.
Yeah.
Well,
Not the 15,000 square feet down the
Okay.
street,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is existing.
Okay.
Right, it's
we're
not
not-
the church.
I had the same reaction.
Sorry.
Until I realized it was the
No.
existing one.
We're doing light assembly.
Understand.
Oh, I thought I was noted.
You're gonna be changing outdoor lighting in any way?
Just clarify that.
We don't have a problem if you do, we just wanna know what you're gonna do.
Yeah, we're just using the existing lighting that's
Fine.
Yeah, this is just a light assembly, correct?
light assembly and automobile storage for personal use.
Yeah.
You aren't using, like, firearms to test your,
There's no testing of live fire.
okay.
The reason bring it up is, the industry, non-nuisance is not allowed, this is before it, isn't
Right.
it? Limited non-nuisance industry is, but it's pretty limited in terms of employees.
Less than 5.
So as long as it's not industry, because if it is, I think it can only be limited industry. And ultimately, it's the building department's call, so the applicants, well, they're not applicants yet, but they're here looking for kind of a thumbs up so they can go do an important business transaction, but at the end of the day, it's not really our call.
Yeah.
You understand that?
No, we put the same question in front of Walt, and I think there was a little bit of disconnect or understanding of whether or not it was exactly what you were saying, if it was non-nuisance, or if there had to be anything extra done. Because of the timeline we're on, we decided to come here today and sit in front of you to try and streamline that answer.
You're not doing any kind of modification to anything outside at all? And you're storing a couple of
It's
nice
use,
cars?
really the question is use. If the use is okay, then we move forward and really, look at Montgomery as a new home, possibly.
Less than a dozen cars?
More than a dozen cars, so I would say,
For storage?
just for storage.
Stack them up, or?
No, on the ground.
Nice.
East or west side of the facility there?
Back end,
On
where
the
the
new
3-hour
birds?
burn wall
On
is.
on the south end.
By the way, the limited non-nuisance industry
Correct.
is really limited, it can't be bigger than 2,500 square feet, which is, what, smaller than your house.
Yeah.
And, not more than 4 employees. So, I mean, that's really limited. Because again, it's a B4, it's not an industrial.
I have to go in front of the ZBA.
Well, it's, what they're doing, as long as they're not industry.
Right.
And, how do you define industry? To me, it's you're doing something with something, the product is different when it comes out than when it comes in. I don't know if assembly is in, not my.
Just bolting things together. What does everybody think? I don't really have a problem with it. I mean,
I don't either, it seems like it's fairly
So you
non-nuisance.
buy like thermal imaging parts from Joe Blow and you, and frames from somebody else and you put them together?
Yeah, so we actually manufactured the thermal, it's on a PET, it's just a PET with printed carbon and silver that conducts electricity. We have a manufacturer in Massachusetts that makes that. So we send it in roll form down here. It basically looks like plastic sheets. We attach wires, put foam for insulation and box and send out. It's a really easy process.
What's PET?
It's like a plastic, like a roll plastic, roll-to-roll plastic.
I think just go see Walt, I think we're okay with that. Makes sense?
Yeah.
So if Walt gives us the green light.
Potato chips, is
Potato
that where they have the potato chips?
Yeah, so it was originally had potato chips in the 15,000 square feet, he built the 43. So there's a little bit, I think one was 94, this one's 2005, the building.
So was it warehouse use?
Yeah, storage and distribution.
Yeah, that's what's
Just
in
taking
there
a
for
part of it
years.
over though, not the whole.
No,
Yeah, just one section.
At least, yeah.
As you drive in on the left or the right side.
It would be the right, so if you're going in, it's the larger building on the left, and it'd be at the far end, south side.
Oh, part of that big building.
Yeah, 7,200 square feet.
Okay, okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm good.
Down the road piece.
Is it Jerry Day? Happy holidays.
Hey, everybody, I guess I'll see you tonight.
Where's the
Yes.
solar project then?
Walt sent these gentlemen in, normally we wouldn't do something like this, we would have a meeting after with a couple of us. You know, because there's no account, there's no application, there's no escrow, so we're kinda at a loss. The solar company's on Shanty Mandir, it's on the other side of the railroad tracks. The vacant side, they wanted for 5 megawatts, 30 acres of ground. Solar.
Just there. Yeah, in full disclosure, I will have to recuse. My brother and I currently crop the land as well as other land, but the land this proposal's on. It's right at the Ulster County border.
So right at the trail too?
Pardon?
Is it right against the trail?
It'd be very close to the trail, and it'd be, I'll leave it to you, but it's probably gonna be more difficult to screen because it's sloping uphill to the county line. In other words, when you're down the rail trail, you're at a significantly lower elevation.
We had the whole damn thing underground, the whole thing.
I don't know
What panels?
No, it's not the panels, I'm talking about the whole service, because we're gonna come off of 208, the wind.
There's power right now that runs along the rail trail, just parallel. I mean, it ran that way when the railroad was
That's
there.
what, Gravinsky tied into.
Gravinsky, exactly.
Yeah, they tied in an arm that went to the Osiris substation. The next time you're on the rail trail, it's just pole after pole right to the hamlet of Waukegan.
Yep.
I don't know if that's where they tap in. I looked at it just quickly, obviously, because I know the land very well. Look at the tax map, because Shanty Mandir's 300 acres is made up of several contiguous tax map numbers and lots. And this project is on 2 of them, I think. And you gotta look at our code, because we limit coverage to per lot.
Yeah.
Now, they obviously could change that around internally, Shanty Mandir to make it fit. And then the other thing is, I don't know if it's class 1 or class 2 soils, because your new solar law prohibits panels on class 1 or class 2. And what I'm saying is right out of the code book, it's not a personal opinion, but those are some threshold issues.
Well, they were waiting for the new law, because I told them they were contacting us and we didn't have a law in place yet. I suggest you wait, and they think they fit.
And then that's their right to make that decision, as long as they know about the new law. And again, you know, is it a question of they come in here and they have to go seek variances?
Right, we're not in a moratorium.
No.
They never did anything with the fees.
They never said that. All right, so anyway, you'll need another attorney on that.
They probably take power off that line running up there along the track.
We'll wait till we get an application.
And
Okay.
Shanty maybe they just have all the incentives for the church, or, I mean, how do they have anything?
I don't, you have to ask Dennis. till.
It is pretty good land?
And well, it varies. Up on the prairie, we call it, it's beautiful. And down below and around where this is, and by the way, they own the old factory pond bed, which DEC made them drain about 15 years ago. One of the largest private lakes, and this powered the condenser. Well, when they
evaporated milk or whatever.
Did they call it the night pond or something?
No, that's different.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
How would you think? Borden's still in Montgomery or Silver Hills?
What's
Big
that?
old Borden building.
Well, they're Borden all over. There was
Yeah.
Borden in Orange, where Shantee is now. There was actually more Borden in Ulster.
I'm Max. I'm gonna be with Bonnie Transit, backing her up.
Yeah, seen your face.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but then, 22 was in the top.
You hate to lose her.
I know. We're gonna bug her from time to time.
Oh, no, and that's fine, because
Okay.
for the transit, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Because, this would be like throwing you in the deep end.
I was thinking it would make a lot of sense to set up a meeting, just maybe the three of us.
Yeah,
Or
oh,
Bonnie
yeah.
and you.
Yeah, yeah.
To just go over files and understand them a little bit better.
I'm already.
I got a lot of color here, but I'm sure there's some applications that are not even on here, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Like 24.
Yeah.
I have a sinus connection that I've been fighting. And the Aaron thing was carbon crazy.
Yes.
I noticed she was
Thanks,
carbon
everybody.
crazy.
Want to make it,
So-
Make it later.
Oh, we'll be there.
which is why I'm hanging up the flowers.
Sure.
And I also
Yeah,
want to
really.
make them so that
Oh my God, Sue.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
This is not.